Hi, Hank. We're still reading the same book, James and the Giant Peach. Um, so the last time he had made friends with all of these animals living inside a giant peach, and then they decided to go to sleep. Yes, the old green grasshopper said, "We really must get some sleep." And then he asked Miss Spider to make the beds. A few minutes later, Miss Spider had made the first bed. It was hanging from the ceiling, suspended by a rope of threads at either end, so that actually it looked more like a hammock than a bed. It was a magnificent affair, and the stuff that it was made of shimmered like silk in the pale light. "I do hope you'll find it comfortable," Miss Spider said to the old green grasshopper. "I made it as soft and silky as I possibly could. I spun it with gossamer. That's a much better quality thread than the one I used for my own." "Thank you so much, my dear lady," the old green grasshopper said, climbing into the hammock. "Ah, this is just what I needed. Good night, everybody. Good night." Then Miss Spider spun the next hammock, and the ladybug got in. After that, she spun a long one for the centipede and an even longer one for the earthworm. "How do you like your bed?" she said to James. "Hard or soft?" "I like it soft, thank you very much," James answered. "For goodness sake, stop staring round the room and get on with my boots," the centipede said. "You and I are never going to get any sleep at this rate. And kindly line them up neatly in pairs as you take them off. Don't just throw them over your shoulder." James worked away frantically on the centipede's boots. Each one had laces that had to be untied and loosened before it could be pulled off. And to make matters worse, all the laces were tied up in the most complicated knots that had to be unpicked with fingernails. I might just sleep with my shoes on if I have 100 pairs of shoes to untie. By the time James had pulled off the last boot and had them all lined up in a row, the centipede was fast asleep. "Wake up, centipede," whispered James, giving him a gentle dig in the stomach. "It's time for bed." "Thank you, my dear child," the centipede said. Then he got down off the sofa and ambled across the room and crawled into his hammock bed. James got into his own hammock, and oh, how soft and comfortable it was compared with the hard, bare boards that his two mean aunts always made him sleep on. "Lights out," said the centipede drowsily. Nothing happened. "Turn out the light," he said. James glanced around the room, wondering which of the others he might be talking to, but they were all asleep. The old green grasshopper was snoring loudly through his nose. The ladybug was making whistling noises as she breathed. The earthworm was coiled up like a spring, wheezing and blowing through his open mouth. As for Miss Spider, she had made a lovely web for herself across one corner of the room, and James could see her crouching right in the very center of it, mumbling softly in her dreams. "Num num 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 num. Num 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 num." "I said turn out the light," said the centipede. James says, "Are you talking to me?" "Of course I'm talking to you. That crazy glowworm has gone to sleep with her nightlight on." For the first time since entering the room, James glanced up at the ceiling. There he saw a most extraordinary sight. So the centipede is telling the glowworm to turn off the nightlight. I get it. Something that looked like a gigantic fly was standing upside down in the middle of the ceiling, and the tail end seemed to be literally on fire. A brilliant greenish light, as bright as the brightest electric bulb, was shining out of its tail. Is that a glowworm? It doesn't look like a worm. Of course it's a glowworm, the centipede said. At least that's what she calls herself. Although you're quite right. She isn't a worm at all. Glowworms are never worms. They are simply fireflies without wings. Wake up, you lazy beast! But the glowworm didn't stir. So the centipede reached out of his hammock and picked up one of his boots from the floor. Put out that wretched light, he shouted, hurling the boot up at the ceiling. The glowworm slowly opened one eye and stared at the centipede. There is no need to be so rude. Come on, shouted the centipede, or I'll put it out for you. Oh, hello, James, the glowworm said, looking down and giving James a little wave and a smile. I didn't see you come in. Well, welcome, my dear boy, welcome, and good night. Then click, out went the light. So there's the glowworm on top, and then there's James in his hammock on the bottom. I think you guys have a hammock in your backyard, don't you? So James Henry Trotter lay there in the darkness with his eyes wide open, listening to the strange sleeping noises that the creatures were making all around him. He was wondering what on earth was going to happen to him in the morning. I mean, he's asleep in the middle of a giant peach. Already he was beginning to like his new friends very much. They were not nearly as terrible as they looked. In fact, they weren't really terrible at all. They seemed extremely kind and helpful, and all in spite of the shouting and arguing that went on between them. Good night, old green grasshopper, he whispered. Good night, ladybug. Good night, Miss Spider. But before he could go through them all, he had fallen fast asleep. We're off, someone was shouting. We're off at last. James woke up with a jump and looked about him. The creatures were all out of their hammocks and moving excitedly around the room. Suddenly, the floor gave a great heave as though an earthquake were taking place. Here we go, shouted the old green grasshopper. Hold on tight. What's happening? Said James. What's going on? The ladybug said, in case you don't know it, we are about to depart forever from the top of this ghastly hill. We are about to roll away inside this great big beautiful peach of a land to a land of what? James asked. Never you mind, said the ladybug, but nothing could be worse than this desolate hilltop and those two repulsive aunts of yours. Hear, hear, they all shouted. Hear, hear. You may not have noticed it, the ladybug went on, but the whole garden, even before it reaches the steep edge of the hill, happens to be on a steep slope, and therefore the only thing that has been stopping this peach from rolling away is the thick stem attaching it to the tree. Break the stem, and off we roll. Watch it, cried Miss Spider. Here we go. Not quite, not quite. At this moment, the ladybug said, Our centipede, who has a pair of jaws as sharp as razors, is up there on top of the peach, nibbling away at the stem. In fact, he must be nearly through it, as you can tell from the way we're lurching about. Would you like me to take you under my wing so that you won't fall over when we start rolling? That's very kind of you, James said, but I think I'll be all right. Just then, the centipede stuck his grinning face through the hole in the ceiling and shouted, "I've done it! We're off!" The journey begins. And who knows where it will end, muttered the earthworm. If you have anything to do with it, it can only mean trouble. Nonsense, said the ladybug. We are now about to visit the most marvelous of places and see the most wonderful things. Isn't that true, Centipede? There is no knowing what we shall see, cried the Centipede. We may see a creature with 49 heads who lives in the desolate snow, and whenever he catches a cold, which he dreads, he has 49 noses to blow. That's a lot of snot. We may see the venomous pink-spotted scrunch, who can chew up a man with one bite. It likes to eat 5 of them roasted for lunch and 18 for supper at night. We might see a dragon, and nobody knows that we won't see a unicorn there. We may see a terrible monster with toes growing out of the tufts of his hair. We may even get lost and be frozen by frost. We may die in an earthquake or tremor. Or nastier still, we may even be tossed on the horns of a furious dilemma. But who cares? Let us go from this horrible hill. Let us roll, let us bowl, let us plunge. Let's go rolling and bowling and spinning until we're away from old Spiker and Sponge. 1 second later, slowly, insidiously, almost gently, the great Peach started to lean forward and steal into motion. The whole room began to tilt over, and the furniture went sliding across the floor and crashed against the wall, and James and Ladybug and Miss Spider and the earthworm, they were all just sliding down the wall.